Hello everyone, and welcome to the Capability Curve with me, Jennifer Cozzi,
and me, Carl Dixon,
where we're going to sit down with senior leaders in marketing, data and technology to glean insight from their experiences building, structuring and leading high-performing teams, and also looking at how they're building the capability that really drives growth.
You know what you're all thinking? Finally, a professional services company with a podcast. We've all been waiting for this day, but you have to look at it from our perspective. Jens and I were doing a lot of work. We wanted to try and shirk some of it. So how better to do that than to come up with a podcast instead, where we can just sit around having conversations with people.
I am going to take this moment, everyone, to apologise for the fact that I am finally letting Carl loose on social media and on podcasts. It's something I've tried to avoid since we took over CVM, but I think the time is now, so apologies in advance. But hopefully, as Carl said, it will be useful and you will get to meet some really great people from our network. So I am excited as long as Mr. Dixon does behave himself. Hello, Natalie, and thank you for joining me today. You and I have worked together a few times already, so really excited for this conversation today. Leadership, I know, is a topic, and leading through change, something that we've discussed about a lot in our previous interactions, but also being a qualified psychometric coach. I know that you have a lot of personal experiences and passion around this topic, so really excited to get started. One of the first questions I wanted to start with was just understanding from your experience what you feel really differentiates leaders that are able to lead their teams through significant changes, and what sets them apart from those that really struggle doing so.
I think the first thing to recognise here when we're talking about change is that as human animals, ultimately, we're creatures of habit. Nobody likes change. And whilst there are some people that just naturally find change easier than others, being aware of that and being aware of who you have in a team makes a big difference. So, for example, people who are lucky to have down-to-earth personality traits, these are people, you recognise them, they're quite practical, they're quite evidence-based in their decision-making, and they also tend to be more cautious people. And that individual finds it much more difficult to break from tradition. They're going to find change much harder, and therefore they're perhaps going to need different types of communication. So for me, in all of my experience, aside from my training and coaching, leaders who understand who they're working with, understand themselves, understand the nuance of the team, and communicate really clearly, tend to be more successful. And I think in communicating, it's important to talk about what's not changing, as much as what is changing. So reminding people, actually, this is our common purpose. That doesn't change. These are our values. Those don't change. But this is the direction of travel. This is the thing we're trying to achieve, and keep it simple and reinforce and create sort of safety and security in that regularity of communication.
And I think that's a really interesting point around that regular communication, but also ensuring that you adapt your style, because actually from our perspective, one of the biggest challenges we see organisations go through with incumbent leaders, and what often can lead to our services, is the need to potentially replace an incumbent or to bring people in that have stronger communication skills that can adapt and recognise that actually what your team are concerned about and what your team need from you as a leader versus what other stakeholder groups may need requires someone that can be consistent in their comms, but also adapt that effectively by recognising what those differing concerns may be. But naturally also, I think when that's easy for us to say, when that pressure actually mounts, when you're in that situation, that can often lead to leaders exemplifying potentially more negative behaviours, be that overextension, excess control. What would you say is important that can help leaders build better awareness of those kind of traits that can come when that pressure mounts?
Yeah, and I think to your first point there, yes, I'm sure you see recruitment briefs because you need somebody who can communicate better and bring a team together. I think it's it's not just about bringing new people in. We can all learn how to do that. We can all develop those skills. We can all develop self-awareness. And I think increasing focus on that kind of development all the time for organizations is really important. But yeah, when pressure mounts, every single one of us, whoever we are, whatever level, whatever age, will default to some behaviors that aren't necessarily helpful. And that's just because we are overplaying particular strengths that we have. So I'll use me as an example.
I was going to say, what have you learnt about yourself?
It might just to make it a little bit more tangible. So one of my strongest qualities is being radical. So I'm not afraid to challenge the status quo. I sort of come up with new thinking and new ideas to solve problems. And that served me really well in my leadership career, especially when I'm in a role, as I have been on numerous occasions, that requires a change or a transformation, is coming in to do something different. But it is also a quality that I can overextend under pressure, which I would never have thought. I would simply not have been aware of myself, because our own experience of our behavior isn't the same as how others experience us. So if I allow myself to overextend there, I can become too keen to drive change. And then it seems to others that I'm just trying to drive change for the sake of change. And that can become unsettling and not take people along with you. So an exercise that I use a lot with leaders when I'm working with them one-to-one or in groups is called Journey to Composure. So I'm a big fan of the Lumina learning. I'm a Lumina practitioner, and it's one of their tools. But essentially it's about identifying the unhelpful behavior, identifying then the trigger for it.
Yeah.
So when you're in a situation, we can all relate to this, whether or not we've got a coach or whether we're using psychometrics. When we're in a situation where perhaps we're in a meeting, our heart rate starts to increase, our breath starts to shallow a little bit. Sometimes we might become a little bit flushed, or we start to become a little bit more mobile. We feel a slight stress inside ourselves. It's in those moments we are likely to overextend. So it's becoming aware and enabling yourself in the moment to recognize, there's something triggering me here, and pause.
Yeah.
Breathe, because taking a slow breath has been proven, in so many areas, to just calm our brain, to relax our body away from that flight reaction or fight reaction, and consciously to then respond with an appropriate behavior rather than react. So working with a coach, using psychometrics or not, is super, super helpful. If you don't have one, creating a feedback culture in the organization is something everyone can do. And I would bring those two things together. Ask for feedback. If you've been in that meeting, leave the meeting and ask a colleague or a peer, how did I come across? I felt like maybe I wasn't as effective as I could have been. How did I come across? What could I have done differently? Follow up with the individuals who were in the room to apologize if perhaps you weren't as constructive as you could have been. That all builds trust as well. But it really comes down to that continuous journey of self-development and self-awareness.
I guess that's really interesting as well when you think about things like imposter syndrome. Actually asking for feedback, I guess, goes both ways. It encourages that self-awareness. It encourages you to better improve how you're communicating or be aware of those traits that you just referenced. But I guess as well, having that feedback culture can also support you in knowing that actually maybe you didn't overextend. Maybe your behaviors are coming from a place of you believe those behaviors are there from subconscious anxiety, but actually maybe that feedback culture will support you and build your confidence in yourself, that actually you're managing those situations really, really well, and having that openness to encourage that feedback, I guess, can really, that's something that I know a lot of people have spoke to me about has really supported them in their own career development. But I guess that idea of awareness can really support when it's yourself that you're reflecting on. But actually, as we all know, we're not always in control. And those goalposts that we're working with, that change or transformation, may be outside of our control. And it may be that the organisation is shifting those goalposts. How would you then advise leaders when that is the case to help keep their teams aligned when they're not necessarily in control of that themselves?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because I think there's an answer on two levels. One is, as you've asked there, I think the leader keeping their own team aligned. But before that, there's the responsibility of the leadership of the organisation to keep the leadership aligned and really plan the change properly. So change is inevitable. Change happens all the time on a micro level, but also on a macro level. And there's a difference. It rarely is given the same priority as other deliverables, as trading, for example, in a retail business, yet it probably is more important because otherwise it creates distraction away from day-to-day delivery. So the first thing I think is, if you're in the right position in the organisation to be initiating the change, really plan it properly, bring your leadership together and align them first. Remember that alignment is not the same as agreement. And that's really, really important. Not everybody is going to agree, but it is essential that you create a shared clarity about the direction that you're moving in, and a shared commitment to the behaviour that is necessary to achieve that direction. And that means, as a leader, as an individual, sometimes you've got to support something that you didn't vote for. So that alignment at the leadership level, I think, is the first most important thing. And then, as one of those leaders leading a team through that period of uncertainty, it's honesty, it's communication, it's going back to that clarity of what's not changing and what is changing, and super open. Get people comfortable with asking questions, get people comfortable with giving feedback, so that you're on the journey together.
And by being successful at that I'm sure will also help build the culture in the organisation that encourages that at different levels. I think one of the things that we see a lot of is that promotion of culture that is often built upon those principles that you've just talked about, which is openness, ownership, clarity. But actually, as you rightly said early on, that needs to be led from the top. That needs to filter down so that the behaviours are exemplified from leaders to leader.
Yeah, I can't remember where I read this, but there's a reference to this. Culture isn't something that you say. You can't just say this is our culture. Culture happens.
Yes.
And it happens through the micro behaviours of leaders.
Yes, absolutely.
So as an individual leader, even if you're in an organisation where there isn't a healthy feedback culture, you have some level of control within your peer group, within your leadership team, to suggest these things, to role model asking for feedback, to raise these issues within your leadership discussions, and you can role model feedback downward into your team.
And do you think listening having that kind of consistent approach, do you find actually having diversity in your teams in terms of both personality and background can help when you're then trying to navigate that change with that kind of consistent message?
For sure. So I'll put the psychometric hat on for a moment.
I was waiting for it to come in.
Imagine a team that is full of very outcome focused people.
Yeah.
If you've ever worked with tools that use colours, this would be a red. In the Lumina model, this is we talk about outcome focus. Now these people are likely to be competitive, so they'll be focused and determined on what it takes to win and deliver the outcome. They'll be super objective, they'll use logical reasoning, towards that outcome. Now, if everybody in the team was the same, the fact is they're not all going to have the same idea. They're likely to disagree. There's likely to be some form of clash because they're all competitive people who are focused on their way. And those tensions that might arise can distract actually from delivering any kind of change at all, or any form of delivery. Plus, that team of people aren't going to be naturally as able to think about how it feels to be around them for other people, because usually, not always, they're less people focused. So it could create a culture that's not very pleasant to be in at all.
Yeah.
Just because you've got the sameness. Now, if you then imagine that same team where you bring in some people who are more people focused, who are able to think about how might this feel to somebody else, and just create the pause. Hold on, guys, let's just think about how everyone will experience this. People who are really good at bringing people together to collaborate, people who have the ability quite naturally to challenge the status quo, to think of different ideas and sort of be more inspirational. Suddenly you bring together diverse qualities that don't necessarily exist in one person, but allow you as a team suddenly to navigate all kinds of challenges, to solve problems together in a different way. And when change is required, you're set up well. And I think that the big thing for me in this conversation would be to bring the thought that don't wait for there to be a change, to start working with your leadership teams and creating the culture that's required to be able to navigate it, because it will happen. And if you're prepared for it, you're going to have a much better chance of delivering it successfully.
I think psychometrics is an interesting one because a lot of people in the industry think it's quite clinical. But actually, when used effectively, it's about empathy, it's about insight. Do you feel that those tools and actually applying those tools with your team can really help build that awareness and help motivate during times of change if you actually use the technologies and tools available themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like it's a weird word, isn't it? Psychometric. It sounds kind of cold and scientific and odd. When really it's a very rich, insightful, kind of illuminating profile of you as an individual. The thing is, back to, the difficulty around feedback, we can't see ourselves as others see us. And so psychometrics are really, really useful to bring the objectivity around our personality traits. The model that I use, the Luminous Spark model, looks at different personas. So it's nuanced enough to be able to show you who you are, what your underlying traits are. If you're at home naturally, what your everyday persona is, what do you bring to work when you're trying to be effective, and also what's your overextended persona. And the richness of that provides an objectivity for you to look at and explore. And when a whole team is working with a tool like this, there's common language suddenly. That culture can start to grow because you're able to talk to one another about the differences between you, to recognize and celebrate those differences, and to help one another in behaving more constructively and bringing your best self to work. So I think they're enormously valuable tools when used with a coach. And we do loads of fantastic workshops where actually this is about creating safe space away from delivery of day-to-day work, to just pause and think about how we can work as a team and be effective together.
I think as well, that value, which I'm sure you agree, also extends to the recruitment space, because actually that contribution, quite often from a diversity perspective, when people talk about wanting a diverse team, they mean diversity of thought, diversity of background, but actually how do you attract that if you're not aware of that diversity within your team, and how to complement that dynamic, and actually where where you may want someone that shoots a bit more from the hip, or you may want someone more considered. Actually understanding what your team looks like today, I think is really valuable, and certainly something that we do use and have seen used a lot more in the search space. But even with that awareness, I think even with that awareness of maybe the diversity you have in the team, when you actually do recruit through change and transformation, that can be really tricky, because a lot of stakeholders don't want to unsettle the people within teams. There can be that element of threat, but also you do need to attract new skills. So what advice would you give to leaders looking to manage that balance when needing to recruit?
I think this is leadership. This is the hard coal edge of leadership. For me, this starts with recognizing your responsibility as a leader to not necessarily do the same thing all the time and necessarily to keep everyone happy all the time, but to do the right thing and bring everyone along on that journey. So it's about time, I think, truly understand where the gaps are in the team. Maybe there aren't gaps that require recruitment. Maybe there are gaps that require development and training and coaching, and don't need to recruit at all. If you do, be clear about what it is that you need. Be honest with your team. Make them part of that journey. If that team recognises the gaps themselves, they're going to be much more open to bringing somebody in from within the organisation or externally, but into their team to fill that gap. If the team have zero awareness of themselves and the skills and the qualities that they have and the gaps, they might be a little bit resistant to somebody new coming in. So I think it's about really spending the time and working with the people that you have, and then being a leader and making the brave decisions and working with people to understand and then accept what's changing.
And then when you go to market, so, that decision's been made, there's more acceptance, within the team and an understanding of why those skills are needed. How have you ensured, or how have you seen your teams ensure that you're actually going to get a new skill set that doesn't duplicate what you have today? We all know that it can be really difficult to attract and assess the right talent, and having the right talent is the most important thing a business can do. But what's your recommendation to how you then approach the actual process of recruitment?
So the first thing I would say is don't recruit for cultural fit. Recruit for cultural contribution, especially if this is a recruitment that's required as part of a change, that your expectation is that something's going to be different. So don't try and recruit what looks the same or is the same as you. Be brave and recruit for the things that you can't do yourself or that your team can't do. Obviously, I'm going to recommend that the use of psychometrics here is a great use case, rather, for psychometrics. One, in understanding what you have within your team, and two, through the recruitment process, so that much more objectively assess what someone's bringing, rather than just what they say they're bringing when they're trying to win the job in an interview process. I'd also say that the process doesn't start and end with the offer. What's super important is that person is brought into the organisation and is supported. So they're announced properly. The team understand what they're bringing to the table that's different. They understand what's around the table already and where the tensions might lie. So you're honest with them to start with. Great idea would be give them a coach. Be clear in their properly planned onboarding, over the first 60, 90 days. Give them a coach, and they will be much more successful at integrating with the existing team and bringing what you're expecting of them.
I think that's something that needs to be spoken a lot more about. Is it's not just, about that process of hiring, which does need more time. I think it's quite a scary place at the moment in the market from a time perspective.
Yes.
With automated screening, AI, the human focus of interviewing face to face is being lost. And I think that time you've spoke about investing in a process is so important. I see thousands of poor CVs that represent fantastic people. And actually that time invested in a process to really, like you say, the presence of psychometrics, understand their drivers, their motivations, their behaviors, that's really going to allow people to shine. But also that second point you raised, that investment, once they've said yes, I think that's really important, and a lot of organizations don't do that well, is just because someone has agreed to a role for an interview process, that's not the end. They've got to land well, and to land well, they need support and they need honesty and transparency, to your point, not correctly explaining the culture they're going to walk into or the challenges they're going to walk into and helping them prepare is only going to negatively affect the organization as a whole, because they won't be able to deliver what you expect.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly important. So, absolutely agree with that. And I'm conscious of time. I was just looking at the time. I think we're getting to the end of our conversation today. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences. If you were going to summarize, if you were going to look back on what we've talked about and summarize, what would you say is, the most important things that leaders can do today when they are trying to navigate a team through change and transformation, or recruit through change and transformation? How would you summarize that advice?
I think the first thing is invest in development, invest in self-awareness, and make the process of change, whether that be a recruitment part of it, whether that be a program part of it, make that a prioritized delivery. You have to stop something else to give it the focus. You can't just add it on and expect it just to happen. But the foundation for all successful teams is self-awareness, mutual respect, mutual understanding, and a common goal.
Thank you so much to Natalie for joining us today, and also for everybody else that dialed in to watch our first episode of The Capability Curve. Please do give us a follow on social media, and also have a look at our website for other useful downloadable content. But in the meantime, Carl and I will be back soon. Thank you.